2024 Republican candidate Tim Scott confronted host of ABC's The View, Sunny Hostin, on air. Let's watch.
You have indicated that you don't believe in systemic racism. What is your definition of systemic racism?
Let me answer the question that you've answered.
Or does it even exist in your mind?
Let me answer the question this way.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. It's your girl VeraMoore, and I am back with another reaction video. Today I'm going to be reacting to The View, and we have Tim Scott shut down The View hosts over systemic racism arguments. Brie and Robby reacts. Okay guys, before we get started, we have some amazing people watching us for the first time. If you're new to the channel, hello, I'm Vera. I do reaction videos. If it is something that you love, why not join Vera City? Hit the subscribe button below, turn on the post notification bell so that you can always be the first person to know whenever a new video drops. And that's guys, let's go.
Things I think about, and one of the reasons why I'm on the show is because of the comments that were made, frankly, on this show, that the only way for a young African-American kid to be successful in this country is to be the exception and not the rule. That is a dangerous, offensive, disgusting message to send to our young people today, that the only way to succeed is by being the exception. I will tell you that if my life is the exception, I can't imagine.
But it is.
But it's not, actually. It's
been 114 years.
Yeah, so the fact of the matter is we've had an African-American president, African-American vice president. We've had 2 African-Americans to be secretaries of the state. In my home city, the police chief is an African-American who's now running for mayor. The head of the highway patrol for South Carolina is an African-American.
Still
in
exceptions.
In 1975, there was about 15% employment in the African-American community. For the first time in the history of the country, it's under 5%.
40% homelessness.
And 50%
of African Americans.
50% of the folks in our community
get 13% of the population.
You had a chance to ask the question. I know that I've watched you on the show that you like people to be deferential and respectful, so I'm going to do the same thing.
That is true.
So here's what I'm going to suggest. I'm going to suggest that the fact of the matter is that progress in America is palpable. It can be measured.
And I think we have just a little bit more of that spicy exchange. Take a listen.
In generations. I look back at the fact that my grandfather, born in 1921 in Sally, South Carolina, when he was on a sidewalk, a white person was coming, he had to step off and not make eye contact. That man believed then, with some doubt now, in the goodness of America, because he believed that having faith in God, faith in himself, and faith in what the future could hold for his kids would unleash opportunities in ways that you cannot imagine. Every kid today can look, just change the stations and see how much progress has been made in this country. ABC, NBC, CBS, ESPN, CNN, Fox News all have African-American and his.
Wow, Tim Scott. So I love what he said, where he said, you don't have to be exceptional to be successful. You don't have to be exceptional to be successful. That's the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. Let's go on.
Hispanic host. So what I'm suggesting is that the yesterday's exception is today's rule.
So this is a series of arguments that I think I've heard a lot from many Black conservatives. I had an amazing conversation with Professor Glenn Lowry, who I consider to be a friend on my podcast, in which he made a lot of these similar kinds of arguments. And so I would say just a couple of things. One, there's a conflation between the idea that progress hasn't happened and the idea that more progress still needs to happen. Of course, it can be true that Black people aren't asked to step off on the side of the road when white people pass by, that we've had a civil rights movement and many, many things have changed for the better since the 1950s or 60s, and also that there exists systemic racism, which he declined to kind of weigh in on specifically or define. And so even if you think systemic racism is very minimal, that it has much less effect, to completely deny it when there's evidence like Black sounding names attached to identical resumes as white sounding names get fewer callbacks in study after study. Housing discrimination studies show similar patterns when exactly identically qualified renters are tried to rent at various buildings. I worked for a public service organization in law school that recruited law students, white and Black and other law students, to go and try to rent apartments because we were all identically qualified. We're all the same, academically, we're all in the same law school together, and see the kind of variation in outcomes that still persist, even if you think it's not overwhelming or shouldn't be the center of someone's political project, and that things have gotten much better, it is difficult to deny that, of course, there's still residual effects of racism out there. And I do think some Black conservatives would have a better argument if they just said, I do think obviously some stuff exists on the margins, but ultimately I'm proud of this country and we should work toward the better. The problem is, if you acknowledge that there's any problem at all, you start to have to put forward policies that address the fact that some people are still being treated differently because of the color of their skin. And politically, conservatives who are the small government party ostensibly, although Ron DeSantis seems to be working to change that, but ostensibly a small government party are unwilling to do that. So you get these kind of arguments that you see here, which I think fly in the face of reality.
Well, I think you can, if you, because she asked him how to define systemic racism, and if you define it, if you say that, by that I mean, racism that is literally written into the law and the operations of the government, most of, you might quibble on the margins, but most of those, well, right, but he could have said that and said that virtually all of those policies have been gotten rid of at the government level, that it's not legal to have interracial marriage and the kind of discrimination that occurred under Jim Crow or literal slavery. All of those things that made our country systemically racist have been worked out of our legal system and our laws for the overwhelming part. But obviously, people are still impacted by racism and racial prejudice. Mm-hmm. He could say that it's not just Black people; it's people of all different ethnicities and all sorts of different contexts. But that race is still something that holds people back in a variety of ways, and we should work to overcome that and work to improve that. And I think there wouldn't really be any conflict over that, right?
Yeah, it is confusing. So, for one, I would say I would explicitly say that the kind of de jure racism that you're describing, mm-hmm. the legal discrimination, is like definitionally very different from systemic racism, and that the problem is there are things that happen that are not, this is a law that says Black people can't do that. Even under de jure racism, features like policies like redlining, which precluded Black people from having access to neighborhoods where there was the kind of real estate growth that created middle class wealth, access to the GI Bill and the ability to get an education from serving in the military that was selectively denied to Black people. Those kinds of policies weren't necessarily Black people can't do it, but it had the effect of excluding Black people from upper middle class or middle class access the way that so many white families had. So what many people who talk about systemic racism are talking about is, okay, those policies existed and affected people that are relatively young, people who are my grandparents' age, people who are my parents' age. And so what do you do about the fact that now we're living with the legacy of things that happened during our lifetime? And it is frustrating to be having these kind of conversations, which I think most people got in like the 80s. Today, for him to say, we have a Black president and a Black VP, when we've had one Black president and one Black VP after 200 plus years of American history, for him to point to himself as a Congress member or talk about the number of Black senators, when in the entire history of the United States of America, there have been 11 Black senators. There have been 1,994 senators. There have been 11 Black senators, and most of those happened during the Reconstruction era. Mm-hmm. So it's like, what are we even talking about right now? I'm not bringing this. I'm not angling to have a conversation about racism. This could have. Sonny Hostin was, but it's just so confusing to me because Tim Scott sitting there as obviously an exceptional person saying, "I'm not the exception."
Yeah, he's a really exceptional person. Came from absolutely nothing. And he wants to present this affirmative view of America as a place where the progress is occurring, things are getting better on a lot of fronts. That it's an optimistic vision that is occasionally missing. Republicans used to scream about Democrats left being like unpatriotic, right, mm-hmm. hating America. Now you hear some of that, I think, almost more so on the right because they're so mad about wokeness and how it's gotten everywhere and how bad it is that you lose sight of the people that voters, I think, want to hear something positive and they love this. Most people like this country. Think it's a good place. They think it's the best country on earth, and want to hear something like what Tim Scott's offering. Not to say we don't have a way to go. We can't make things better, but this is a place that has gotten so much better for Black people, for all sorts of minority communities, for all sorts of affinity groups over the course of the last 80 years, the Tim Scott and his grandfather's lifetime.
And I would say to Sunny Hostin, what she should say is in response to Tim Scott's initial framing that, well, you guys are telling us that the only way a Black person can be successful is to be the exception. No, that's a weird twist of the argument. The argument is, unfortunately, for so many, because of all of the legacy of all of the programs we've been discussing in the past, the reality is that it is harder to access middle-class status, much less your extraordinary status as a congressperson and a presidential candidate, if you were Black versus if you were other kinds of things. If you're poor versus if you're other kinds of things. And the fact that he came up poor and Black and succeeded should be not evidence that other people don't need help. And weaponizing one's personalized success to preclude other people from having similar opportunities. I mean, don't you wish your life had been easier, even if you did make it through in your Horatio Alger story? That is what I would say, that I believe in the promise of America, and don't you want to help more people achieve what you have achieved, given how hard you know that path is?
But I don't want to stress too, and he actually did mention it there in his remarks. Some of the that goes on in schools, some of the DEI stuff, and that whole aspects of white supremacy handout I've mocked 6 ways to Sunday on this show, that says, right, white culture is, whiteness is hard work and individualism and self-improvement, and that's aspects of whiteness. So you can't be expected. That's not really your culture. So you can't succeed that way. That messaging to young people, which I think is very pernicious. I'm not saying it's happening everywhere, but it's pernicious and should not happen, and I think that's what
I think it's whack, as the kids used to say, but I don't think that it is at all widespread. It's a weird niche academic, maybe DEI thing, and if there's an argument that it shouldn't be allowed to spread, I think that's a perfectly fine argument. But then to try to root some of the disparities that exist in the country in language that is new,
right,
or in some kind of cultural practice that reflects that language, which has never been substantiated, at the same time that you don't want to engage at all with the literal laws and policies that have shaped outcomes in the United States of America, that's what feels a little disingenuous, I think.
But we want to improve those disparities, not throw up our hands and say they can't be fixed.
I would love to improve them, but what is the conservative? This is what I got into with Glenn Lowry. I said at some level, even if I were to concede, which I'm not, that all of the racial disparities that exist could be attributed to some cultural problem. Black people just don't care enough about education or whatever the argument is.
No, not you.
I know that you're not saying that, but
no, I'm saying the opposite of that.
No, but arguments were made, and so the implication becomes: if you don't believe there's systemic racism, if you don't believe there's any holdover from any of these policy effects, from slavery, from the segregation that my parents were born into, right? If you think that none of that has any effect on today somehow, but if you believe that, and the disparities still exist, then why would you be making that argument? What are the policy implications of that? And I think the line that people don't draw, the circle that people don't close is, well, if it's not the government's fault, I don't have to do anything about it. It's innate, the natural state of some people to be less than, lower than other people.
I still think it's the government's fault.
To work less hard and be ignorant and da-da-da-da. And therefore we should cut social programs. And what that ends up doing, because most people on social programs in the United States of America are actually white, most people on food stamps are white, it's a 75% white country or whatever it is, that is, Black people are being used, as they have been for decades now, as an excuse to cut public policy, the social policies, the social safety net, more broadly speaking. And so it really is an end run to undo the social safety net that a lot of poor and working class white people end up falling for, because there is this, they call it the wages of whiteness. They call it like you're told at least you're better than somebody, so don't fight. Why would you align yourself with this group that you're being told you're better than, even though not aligning yourself with that group is causing your life to be worse, because they're shutting down swimming pools and cutting public services that you used to enjoy back in a world that was more a world where the politics catered more to actual working class and poor white people, and the segregated social benefits that used to exist in the 1940s and 50s.
Well, we will continue talking about this, and we'll have more Rising in just a minute.
I love how Tim Scott shuts those women up. I dislike how Sonny Houston always asks questions. Oh, the way she always asks people questions on her show, she asks them question, and when she doesn't like the answer, she starts interrupting them and would not even let them answer. One thing about The View is that these women, they spread so much hate. Tim Scott did an amazing job on The View. So this whole thing on racism is just crazy. What are your takes on this? What do you guys think about this video? Drop a comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a huge thumbs up and please share this video. And if you're new to the channel, join VeraCity. Hit the subscribe button below, turn on the post notification bell so that you can always be the first person to know whenever any video drops. And that's guys, I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.